What if there was a natural root so sweet, it made sugar look weak? And what if the world didn't lose it by accident, but simply chose to forget it? Today, sugar is everywhere. It's in your coffee, your food, your snacks. And for most people, it feels impossible to replace. But what almost nobody talks about is that long before modern sugar became dominant, there were natural alternatives that didn't come from factories. They came straight from the soil. And one of them stood out above the rest. A root so naturally sweet that people used it not just as food, but as a source of energy, flavor, and even survival. It grew quietly, without attention, without industrial systems, and yet somehow it disappeared from everyday life. So, what happened? In this video, you're going to discover the story of this ancient root, why it was so powerful, why it vanished, and what that means for how we grow and consume food today. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment. Do you think natural foods from the past were better than what we use today? Because what you're about to learn might completely change the way you see something as simple as sweetness. Now let's go back to a time when this root was not forgotten, but essential. Long before sugar became something you could buy in a bag, sweetness was rare. It wasn't something people consumed every day. It wasn't hidden inside processed foods or added to everything. Sweetness was something you found, not something you manufactured. And that's where this ancient root enters the story. In a time when farming was simpler and people depended directly on the land, certain plants gained special value. Not because they looked impressive, but because of what they offered. And this root offered something unusual, a deep, natural sweetness that didn't require refining, extracting, or transforming. You could pull it straight from the ground. And it was already sweet. Imagine that for a moment. No factories, no processing, no chemicals, just soil, water, time, and something that tasted like a reward. This root was often grown quietly, in small plots, sometimes even in places that didn't receive full sunlight. It didn't demand perfect conditions. It adapted. It survived. And because of that, it became a reliable source of both food and flavor. But here's what made it truly special. It wasn't just sweet, it was stable. Unlike fruits that spoil quickly or crops that depend on specific seasons, this root could remain underground, protected, almost like a natural storage system. People didn't need to rush to harvest it. They could leave it in the soil and take what they needed when they needed it. It was food security, in its simplest form. And over time, it became part of daily life. Not as a luxury, but as something practical, something dependable. A quiet solution that worked without drawing attention. But then something began to change. As societies grew and food systems became more complex, people started looking for faster results, larger yields, and easier distribution. Slowly, the focus shifted away from resilient plants toward scalable ones. And this root, despite all its advantages, didn't fit that new direction. It wasn't flashy. It didn't grow fast enough. It didn't behave the way large systems wanted it to behave. So little by little, it started to fade. Not because it stopped working, but because something else was easier to control. And that raises an important question. If this root was so useful, so reliable, and so naturally sweet, why would anyone stop using it? That's exactly what we're going to uncover next. Now it's time to reveal what this root actually is. It's called licorice root. Yes, the same plant that today most people only associate with candy. But in its original form, long before it became a processed sweet, licorice was something completely different. It was a natural source of sweetness, powerful, stable, and surprisingly efficient. When you taste real licorice root, the experience is very different from sugar. The sweetness doesn't hit you all at once. It builds slowly, stays longer, and feels almost deeper. It's not aggressive, it's controlled. And that happens for a simple reason. This root stores its sweetness in a different way. Instead of delivering a fast spike, it releases it gradually. That's why, in the past, it wasn't just used as a treat. It was used as a practical food source. People would chew it directly, use it to flavor drinks, even rely on it during long periods without access to other sweet foods. It was simple, portable, and effective. And that's what made it so valuable. Now compare that to what we use today. Modern sugar is designed for speed. It's extracted, refined, and concentrated to deliver immediate impact. It fits perfectly into a system that values fast production and instant results. But licorice root didn't work like that. It required time, it required patience, and most importantly, it couldn't be easily transformed into something that could be mass-produced in the same way. And that's where the problem begins. Because once a faster, more scalable alternative appears, systems don't choose what's better. They choose what's easier. And little by little, licorice root started to lose space. Not because it stopped working, but because something else became more convenient. And that raises an even bigger question. If licorice root was so effective, so natural, and so widely used, why did it almost disappear from everyday life? That's what we're about to uncover. When this root began to disappear, it didn't happen all at once. There was no moment where people suddenly decided to abandon it. No clear turning point. Instead, it faded slowly, almost invisibly, as the world around it changed. Farming became less about resilience and more about efficiency. The goal was no longer to grow what worked in real conditions, but to grow what could be scaled, transported, and controlled. Crops were selected not for their ability to survive in difficult environments, but for how easily they could fit into a system. And this root didn't fit. It grew underground, quietly, without urgency. It didn't produce massive yields overnight. It didn't look impressive in large fields. And most importantly, it couldn't be easily transformed into something that could be stored, packaged, and distributed on a massive scale. It was simple, and simplicity doesn't always win in a complex system. At the same time, sugar was evolving. It was being refined, concentrated, and turned into something extremely powerful. A small amount could deliver intense sweetness. It became easier to transport, easier to sell, and easier to standardize. And that changed everything. Because once a system finds something that is easier to control, it builds around it. Factories adapted, markets adapted, habits adapted, and people adapted without even noticing. The root didn't disappear because it failed. It disappeared because it didn't belong in the new structure. But here's where things take an interesting turn. Even though it faded from everyday use, it never truly vanished. In certain places, in small gardens, in traditional practices, it still exists. Quietly, almost hidden. Passed down not through mass production, but through knowledge. And that creates a strange contrast. On one side, you have a world that depends on processed sweetness, fast, intense, everywhere. On the other, something slower, more natural, still waiting, but mostly ignored. And this isn't just about one root, it's about a pattern. How many other plants, techniques, and ideas were left behind simply because they didn't fit into a system built for speed? How much knowledge was replaced, not because it was worse, but because it was less convenient? When you start looking at it this way, you begin to see that progress doesn't always mean improvement. Sometimes it just means replacement. And sometimes the most valuable things are the ones that quietly stepped out of the spotlight. We live in a world where sweetness is easy to find, but rarely understood. What used to come from the soil, slowly and naturally, is now produced quickly and everywhere. And in that shift, something important was lost. Not just a root, but a way of thinking. Because this ancient plant wasn't just food. It was patience. It was balance. It was a reminder that not everything needs to be fast to be valuable. And maybe the real question isn't why it disappeared, but why we stopped looking for it. If this made you see food in a different way, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes the future isn't about discovering something new. It's about remembering what was always there.